There's a quiet kind of person who doesn't always fit easily into the noise of the world. They listen more than they speak. They watch the way light falls across a room and think about how time moves, how everything is always changing. They pause before answering, not because they're unsure, but because they're weighing 10 different possibilities at once. These are the deep thinkers, the ones who spend more time inside their minds than in conversations, the ones who can turn a single moment into an entire universe of thought. But if you've ever been one of them, you know it's not easy, because being a deep thinker isn't just about intelligence, it's about sensitivity. It's about seeing the layers of things most people walk past. It's both a gift and a burden. And to understand deep thinkers, you have to understand the tension between their inner world and the outer one. Most people think too much thinking leads to confusion. But for a deep thinker, thinking is breathing. It's how they process existence. They don't just see a tree, they see how it's rooted in the soil, how it bends toward light, how its life mirrors their own in unseen ways. They find metaphors in everything. A conversation becomes a study of emotion. A silence becomes a question. A glance becomes an entire story. Psychologically speaking, deep thinkers have what researchers call high-trade introspection, a tendency to analyze not only what happens around them, but also what happens inside them. They're constantly scanning for meaning, asking why, not to be difficult, but because why feels like oxygen. This is linked to activity in a brain region called the default mode network, which is more active when we're lost in thought or reflection. It's the same network that lights up during creativity, imagination, and memory. So the mind of a deep thinker is a storm of connections, constantly weaving, comparing, reflecting. But this same ability can be isolating, because while others move through life reacting, deep thinkers are observing. They pause, they notice details, they think before they speak, and sometimes by the time they're ready, the conversation has already moved on. So they stay silent, and people mistake that silence for disinterest, when really it's depth. A deep thinker doesn't just want to talk, they want to understand. They crave meaningful conversations, ones that dive below small talk into fears, dreams, the architecture of the human heart. Surface-level chatter feels exhausting to them because while most people swim in the shallows of daily life, deep thinkers are diving for pearls in the ocean floor of thought. But that depth comes with a price. It often makes them overthink. They replay events, dissect every sentence, wonder what someone meant, wonder if they said too much or too little. Their mind becomes a loop of what-ifs, and maybe they meant this, not because they're insecure, but because they see nuance everywhere. Every choice has a dozen meanings, every emotion has hidden roots, and their brain won't stop until it finds the truth. There's a term in psychology called metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking. Most people use it occasionally. Deep thinkers live inside it. It's like they're always watching their own thoughts from the outside, questioning them, rearranging them, trying to understand their patterns. This makes them incredibly self-aware, but also prone to self-doubt. Because when you're aware of everything, you also see all your flaws in high definition. A deep thinker doesn't just ask, "What do I want?" They ask, "Why do I want it? Where does that desire come from? What would happen if I got it or if I didn't?" They analyze love, ambition, fear, memory, until they can almost hold these invisible things in their hands. But in doing so, they sometimes lose the simple joy of just being. They forget that not everything needs to be understood. Some things are meant to be felt. You'll often find deep thinkers walking alone, headphones in, not because they're lonely, but because solitude is their native language. They need space to breathe, to process, to untangle thoughts that others don't even know exist. They are people who can feel deeply while appearing calm. Their emotions move like quiet waves beneath the surface, unseen but powerful. They might sit in a cafe staring at nothing, but inside their head they're replaying the moment they said something 10 years ago and wondering what it revealed about who they were then. This isn't self-punishment, it's analysis. Deep thinkers don't judge themselves as much as they try to map themselves. They're trying to draw the geography of their own mind, to know where each feeling lives, and that can make them appear detached from reality when in truth they're simply trying to see it from every possible angle. One fascinating thing about deep thinkers is that they often experience what psychologists call existential thinking. That's when you don't just wonder about your life, but about life itself, about time, purpose, morality, consciousness, questions that don't have easy answers, and that's what sets them apart from ordinary overthinkers. Overthinking is worrying about the future. Deep thinking is questioning reality itself. It's the difference between anxiety and awareness. But here's where it gets paradoxical. The same mind that can see patterns in everything can also create illusions that don't exist. Because when you think deeply, you can connect anything to anything, and sometimes that web becomes a trap. They might read too much into silence, assume meaning where there is none, or turn simple things into philosophical puzzles that never resolve. It's like having a microscope that's too powerful. You start seeing things that weren't meant to be seen so closely. Still, it's that same depth that makes them incredibly creative. Many of history's most influential thinkers, Einstein, Da Vinci, Jung, were deep thinkers. They saw the invisible threads that connect ideas. They looked at problems from angles no one else did, because when your mind never stops asking why, you eventually stumble upon answers that others miss. But in modern society, deep thinking isn't always celebrated. We live in a world that rewards speed, productivity, and certainty. Pausing to reflect can look like hesitation. Silence can look like weakness. Complexity can look like confusion. So deep thinkers often learn to hide their depth, to fit into a world that moves faster than their mind does. They nod along in conversations, even when they disagree. They smile politely while their thoughts wander galaxies away. And after everyone leaves, that's when their real dialogue begins, inside their own head. There's a loneliness in that kind of inner life, because deep thinkers often crave connection, but only the kind that feels real. And genuine connection requires vulnerability. But not everyone wants to dive that deep. So deep thinkers stay guarded. They become selective, observing quietly until someone shows signs of depth too. Only then do they open the door. And when they do, it's not halfway, it's all the way. They'll tell you their fears, their hopes, the things they don't even tell themselves out loud. Because deep thinkers don't do halfway hearts. But that vulnerability can backfire because when you see the world in shades of gray, you expect others to as well. You assume people mean what they say, that honesty is the baseline, but not everyone operates from that depth. So when reality doesn't align with their expectations, it hurts more. Not because they're fragile, but because they've invested so much meaning into everything. To a deep thinker, even a small betrayal feels cosmic. Even a brief kindness can restore their faith in humanity. Everything matters, and that's the double-edged sword. For deep thinkers, every thought is alive. Every emotion echoes. They can't numb themselves even when they want to. They feel the weight of things that others overlook. The way a stranger avoids eye contact, the way laughter fades when the moment's over. The way people promise forever while already thinking of tomorrow. They don't just see what is, they see what could have been. There's a theory in psychology called depth processing, the tendency to encode experiences with rich meaning and emotional associations. This means that when deep thinkers remember something, they don't just recall facts. They recall how it felt, what it symbolized, what it might have meant. So they carry memories not as moments, but as entire ecosystems of feeling. That's why nostalgia hits them harder. It's why they can listen to a song and suddenly be back in a version of themselves that doesn't exist anymore. But this isn't just emotional intensity, it's the way their brain is wired. Studies show that people who engage in reflective and abstract thinking have stronger neural connections between the emotional and analytical parts of the brain. They literally think and feel at the same time. That's why they can't just turn off their thoughts. Their emotions are woven into their logic. To them, feeling is thinking, and sometimes that makes them misunderstood. People might call them distant or dramatic or too complicated. But what they really are is aware. They see the hidden structure behind everything. How fear disguises itself as anger. How love hides behind pride. How people project what they can't accept. And once you see that deeply, it's hard to unsee it. It's hard to live simply when you've realized how complex everything is. Deep thinkers often struggle to be present, not because they don't want to be, but because their mind exists in timelines. They replay the past, analyze the present, and imagine 100 versions of the future all at once. It's exhausting, but it's also beautiful, because it means they can see possibility where others see endings. They can find meaning even in pain, and that's what gives them resilience. Because to a deep thinker, even suffering is information. It teaches them about themselves, about the world, about truth. But maybe the hardest part of being a deep thinker is learning when to stop thinking, when to let go of needing to understand everything, when to accept that some answers don't exist yet, because meaning, no matter how much we chase it, is something we create, not something we find. And that's the quiet irony. The same mind that searches endlessly for truth eventually learns that peace isn't in answers, it's in presence. It's in sitting beneath a sky that doesn't explain itself, but still feels infinite. It's in learning to live with questions and still feel complete. Because maybe that's the final stage of deep thinking. Not knowing more but needing less. Not analyzing everything to death but understanding that depth isn't about drowning in thought. It's about seeing clearly enough to float. You can usually recognize a deep thinker not by what they say, but by the spaces between their words. That pause before they speak, where their mind is filtering through layers of thought, isn't hesitation, it's precision. They're searching for the truest version of what they mean, because words matter to them. They understand how language shapes reality, how a sentence can heal or harm, and so they speak carefully, sometimes too carefully, which can make others think they're shy or withdrawn. But the truth is, they're listening to everything. The tone, the subtext, the silence between sentences. Because to them, communication isn't just about what's said, it's about what's felt. Psychologically, this kind of awareness is tied to high empathy and pattern recognition. Deep thinkers are constantly reading emotional data. They notice micro-expressions, subtle changes in voice, tiny shifts in energy that reveal what someone's not saying out loud. That's why they can often sense when something is wrong, even when no one else can. It's not magic, it's attentiveness. They process the world like a detective of emotion, scanning for patterns that others overlook. But this kind of mind comes with a strange side effect. When you can see through things, it's hard to stay blind. You start noticing inconsistencies, how people say one thing and do another, how society glorifies happiness while hiding its pain, how perfection is an illusion we're all taught to chase. And once you start seeing that clearly, it changes how you relate to the world. You stop craving surface validation, you crave truth instead. That's why deep thinkers are often drawn to art, philosophy, writing, or solitude, not because they're avoiding life, but because they're trying to understand it. They need spaces where their minds can stretch without judgment. They find comfort in books, in music, in long walks where thoughts can unfold freely. They might not talk much, but when they do, it's with intention. They prefer conversations that awaken something, ideas that linger after the words are gone. But for all their insight, deep thinkers struggle with something profound, mental noise. Their thoughts don't stop. It's like standing in front of 10 radio stations, all playing at once, each broadcasting a different frequency of memory, idea, and question. Even when they try to rest, their brain keeps rewinding, rewriting, predicting. And while most people can distract themselves with noise, deep thinkers drown in silence because silence amplifies everything inside. This often leads to what psychologists call rumination, the repetitive focus on problems, feelings, or mistakes. For many deep thinkers, it's not about being negative, it's about seeking resolution. Their mind wants closure, wants to understand, wants to make sense of contradictions. But not every question has an answer, and learning that can be one of their hardest lessons. There's a story about a philosopher who once said, "I think, therefore I am." It sounds profound, but for a deep thinker, it's almost a curse because thinking confirms their existence, but it can also consume it. They can think themselves into corners, analyzing love until it feels mechanical, studying fear until it becomes predictable. They can know so much about emotion that they forget to feel it. And sometimes the most difficult thing for a deep thinker to do is to simply experience life without dissecting it. But when they learn that balance, when they allow thought to serve feeling instead of replacing it, they become extraordinary. Because deep thinkers at their best are bridges. They connect logic with empathy, intellect with intuition. They can analyze pain and still hold compassion for it. They can see the flaws in humanity and still choose to love it. That's rare, that's wisdom, not just intelligence. A deep thinker doesn't see people as good or bad. They see them as stories. They understand that everyone is shaped by unseen battles, by experiences that left marks invisible to the eye. So they forgive easily, but they forget rarely. They may let go of people, but not the lessons those people taught them. They carry those lessons quietly, turning them over in their mind like stones smoothed by time. If you've ever wondered why deep thinkers often see melancholy, it's not sadness, it's awareness. It's the understanding that beauty and loss are always intertwined, that everything we love eventually changes form. It's the acceptance that joy and grief are two notes in the same song, and feeling both at once is part of what it means to be fully alive. Psychologists sometimes call this emotional complexity, the ability to experience mixed emotions simultaneously. It's not confusion, it's capacity. Deep thinkers don't label emotions as good or bad. They see them as information. Fear tells them what matters. Sadness reveals what they value. Joy reminds them what to protect. To them, every feeling has meaning if you listen long enough. But here's something many people don't realize about deep thinkers. They are not always serious. In fact, some of the funniest people you'll ever meet are deep thinkers, because when you understand the absurdity of life, humor becomes a form of wisdom. They laugh not because they don't care, but because they see how fragile everything is. And laughter is how they hold it lightly. They know that sometimes the only sane response to a chaotic world is to smile at its madness. Still, deep thinkers often feel misunderstood. They can come across as distant or hard to read, when in reality they're just lost in thought. They're not ignoring you. They're processing 10 layers of what you just said. They're trying to understand not just your words, but your intention, your tone, your emotion. They don't talk to win. They talk to connect. And when that connection doesn't happen, they retreat. Not out of pride, but protection. Because here's the truth, deep thinkers feel deeply. They might appear calm on the outside, But inside, emotions swirl like a storm beneath still water. They can sense tension in a room, notice when someone's smile doesn't reach their eyes, feel the heaviness of things unsaid. And that sensitivity, while powerful, can also make life overwhelming. They absorb too much. They pick up energy that isn't theirs. And that's why they often need solitude to detox from the emotions of the world. Alone, they reset, they journal, reflect, stare out of windows, think about everything and nothing. And in that quiet, they find themselves again. It's not loneliness, it's restoration. Because for a deep thinker, solitude is where clarity lives. It's where the noise fades and they can finally hear the quiet truth inside them. But deep thinking without grounding can become a spiral. So the healthiest deep thinkers learn to anchor themselves in reality. They practice mindfulness, creativity, or service, something that connects their inner world to the outer one. Because without expression, thought becomes heavy. They learn to translate their reflections into something tangible. A piece of art, a poem, a conversation that heals. They realize that the purpose of thinking isn't to escape life, but to enrich it. One of the most beautiful things about deep thinkers is that they rarely accept things at face value. They question the systems, the traditions, the assumptions that people follow blindly. And while that can make them seem rebellious, it's actually compassion, because they care enough to ask, why do we do this? Does it still make sense? Is there a better way? Their curiosity is an act of love for truth. And yet, this same curiosity can make life more complicated. Because when you see multiple perspectives, it's hard to take sides. You understand everyone, and so you feel everything. You see how hurt people hurt others, how no one is purely right or wrong, and suddenly the world feels too intricate for simple answers. That's the burden of empathy. It makes judgment impossible. And it's why deep thinkers often feel out of place in a world that prefers certainty to truth. But that's what makes them rare. In an age of instant opinions, deep thinkers hesitate, not because they don't care, but because they care too much to speak without thought. They know that words have weight. They know that complexity matters. And they know that sometimes silence says more than sound ever could. If you love a deep thinker, you'll notice they value understanding more than agreement. They don't need you to think like them. They just want you to think with them, to question, to wonder, to explore life's mysteries side by side. Their love language is curiosity. Their affection is shown in attention, in remembering small details, in asking how you really are, in seeing you beyond your words. But they also need patience because deep thinkers move slowly when it comes to trust. They don't open easily. They test the depth of people's intentions the same way they test their own thoughts. And when they do finally let you in, it's because they've decided your soul is safe. They don't fall often, but when they do, they fall entirely. Their love is not casual, it's conscious. There's something profoundly human about the way deep thinkers exist. They remind us that life isn't meant to be skimmed, that silence can be sacred, that not every moment needs to be filled with noise or certainty. They remind us that mystery has its own kind of beauty, that asking questions is not a weakness, it's wonder. In the end, the psychology of deep thinkers reveals something about all of us, that every person somewhere inside has the capacity to think deeply, to look beyond distraction and face themselves honestly. We just forget, in the rush of life, how powerful stillness can be. Maybe that's why deep thinkers exist, to slow the world down a little, to remind us that thought, when done with intention, is an act of love. Because thinking deeply isn't just about understanding the world, it's about cherishing it. It's about standing in awe of how complex we are, how fleeting time is, how beautiful imperfection can be. So if you're a deep thinker, don't apologize for your silence. Don't shrink your thoughts to fit smaller conversations. The world needs minds like yours, people who can see the invisible, question the obvious, and find meaning in the mundane. You might not always fit in, but you were never meant to. You were meant to see through, to turn chaos into clarity, noise into insight, moments into meaning. Because deep thinking isn't just a way of understanding life, it's a way of honoring it. And while the world moves fast, you have something it often forgets: depth, and depth in a shallow world is its own kind of light.